The most dangerous person you will ever meet is not the one who hates you openly. It is the one who smiles while systematically dismantling everything you believe about yourself, who holds your hand while quietly convincing you that you are lucky anyone holds your hand at all, who says I love you with their mouth while their every action communicates you are nothing without me. And the most dangerous lie you will ever believe is that you deserved it. There is something profound that happens when a person who has been systematically broken down begins to piece themselves back together, and it is not a quiet thing. It is not gentle or polite. It is a seismic shift in the order of things that sends shockwaves through the very relationship that tried to destroy you. Because healing is not passive. Healing is not simply recovering what was lost. Healing is the active reconstruction of a self that was deliberately dismantled by someone who needed you small in order to feel large. And you must understand this clearly before anything else. The narcissist in your life did not hurt you by accident. They hurt you by design, because your confidence threatened them, your joy unsettled them, your independence made them feel irrelevant. And so they worked, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly, to chip away at every beautiful part of you until you became dependent on their validation, just to feel like you existed at all. But here is the uncomfortable truth that most people are not willing to face. And it is the truth that will set you completely free if you have the courage to sit with it. The narcissist only had power over you because you were operating under a false belief, the belief that their opinion of you was the truth. You handed them the keys to your self-worth without realizing it, not because you were weak, but because you were loving, because you were the kind of person who believed in people, who saw potential, who gave and gave and gave, expecting that one day the same generosity would be returned. And they saw that openness in you and they exploited it mercilessly. So let us be precise about something. Your vulnerability was never the problem. It was always their predatory relationship with your vulnerability that was the problem. And those are two very different things. Now comes the part that no one tells you about healing, the part that looks almost unfair from the outside. When you begin to genuinely heal, when you begin to reclaim your voice and your time and your sense of self, the narcissist does not celebrate your growth. They panic. They escalate. They hoover you back in with sudden affection, or they punish you with cold and calculated cruelty because your healing is the single greatest threat to the identity they built on top of your suffering. They needed you confused. They needed you second-guessing yourself at every turn. They needed you apologizing for things that were never your fault. Because a person who questions themselves is a person who can be controlled, but a person who knows their own worth, a person who has looked clearly at what was done to them and decided to refuse it, that person becomes completely ungovernable. And the flaw, narcissist has no playbook for someone who simply will not play. So you must understand what reclaiming your power actually looks like. It does not look like revenge. It does not look like confrontation. It does not look like making them see what they did to you, because they know exactly what they did to you. The person who manipulates with surgical precision is not confused about the impact of their actions. They simply do not care. And chasing their acknowledgement is like trying to collect a debt from someone who will never admit they borrowed anything. It is a trap. It is the oldest trap they have. So reclaiming your power means something far more radical and far more difficult. It means redirecting every ounce of energy you spent trying to fix them, trying to understand them, trying to earn their love back, and pointing that energy directly at yourself. Begin with the most basic things. Begin with your body. Begin with sleep and food and exercise. Begin with the small dignities they made you feel you did not deserve. Because the narcissist often wages a quiet war against your physical self-care, making you feel selfish for taking up space, for resting, for having needs at all. And when you begin to take care of your body again, you are sending a message to the deepest part of your nervous system that you matter, that your existence is worth tending to. And this is revolutionary when you have been living inside a relationship that told you the opposite every single day. Then rebuild your relationships, because isolation is one of the narcissist's most powerful weapons that pull you away from the people who see you clearly, because people who see you clearly are dangerous to the illusion the narcissist needs to maintain. And when you return to those people, when you let yourself be known again by those who genuinely care for you, something in you begins to remember who you were before the damage. And that remembering is not nostalgic. It is not about going backward. It is about recognizing that the self you lost was never actually destroyed. It was buried, and it is still alive, and it is waiting. Then comes the most powerful step of all. And it is the one that will make the narcissist regret everything in the deepest way possible, even if they never say a single word about it. You must build a life so full, so intentional, so aligned with your actual values and your actual gifts that there is simply no room left for the weight of what they did to you, not because you have forgotten, not because you have excused it, but because you have decided that the rest of your life will not be held hostage to their worst moments. This is what breaks them, not your anger, not your tears, not your confrontations, but your absolute and total flourishing in the aftermath of everything they put you through, because they counted on destroying you permanently and you refused. There is a particular kind of suffering that is unique to those who have been wronged by someone incapable of genuine remorse, and it is not the suffering of the original wound, as devastating as that wound was. It is the secondary suffering, the prolonged and quietly destroying suffering of waiting, of hoping, of replaying conversations in your mind and imagining the moment they finally look you in the eyes and say, "I was wrong, I hurt you, I am sorry, and you deserve better than what I gave you." And here is the brutal and liberating truth that you need to hear right now. That moment is almost certainly never coming. Not because you do not deserve it. You deserve it completely, but because the person who hurt you in the way a narcissist hurts people does not have the internal architecture required to deliver it honestly. An apology requires self-reflection. It requires the ability to sit with guilt. It requires prioritizing someone else's pain over your own ego, and these are precisely the capacities that are absent in the person you are waiting on. So when you spend your days rehearsing what you would say if they apologized, when you check their social media looking for signs of regret, when you replay every argument hoping to find the moment they might finally understand what they did, you are not healing. You are handing them a continued lease on your life long after they should have been evicted. And this is the trap that so many survivors of narcissistic relationships fall into without realizing it. You left the relationship physically, but you never left it mentally. They are still living rent-free in the most valuable real estate in the world, which is your mind, your focus, your daily emotional energy. And as long as they occupy that space, they are still winning, still controlling, still diminishing you, even from a distance, even after the relationship is over, even after you swore to yourself that you were done. Now let us talk about what it actually means to stop seeking the apology. Because it is not about pretending the harm did not happen. It is not about performing forgiveness before you feel it. It is not about convincing yourself that what they did was acceptable or that you should simply move on as though none of it mattered. What it means is something far more precise and far more empowering. It means making a conscious and courageous decision that your future will no longer be organized around their past behavior. It means recognizing that the apology you are seeking is actually a symbol. It is a symbol of validation, of confirmation that your pain was real and your experience was legitimate. And here is what you must understand deeply. You do not need them to confirm your reality. Your reality is already real. Your pain was already real. And you are allowed to know that without their permission. The moment you stop outsourcing your validation to the person who violated you is the moment your actual life begins. And this is not a small thing. This is not a subtle shift. This is a complete reorganization of how you move through the world, because suddenly all of that energy that was pointed backward, all of that emotional labor spent analyzing them and waiting on them and grieving what they refused to give you, all of it becomes available to you. And the question you must ask yourself with real seriousness is, what will you do with it? What does a life built on your own terms actually look like? What have you been postponing because you were too exhausted from the emotional labor of surviving that relationship? What gifts have been sitting dormant inside you because you were too busy managing their chaos to develop your own potential? Begin to answer those questions honestly and then begin to act on the answers, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, because waiting to feel ready is another form of the same waiting that kept you stuck. Begin now in whatever small way is available to you today. Sign up for the course you kept putting off. Reach out to the friend you drifted from. Start the project that you told yourself you would begin once things settle down, because things will not settle down on their own. You have to create the settling. You have to build the life that makes the chaos irrelevant by filling your days so completely with meaning and forward movement that there is genuinely no psychological space left for obsessing over someone who never deserved your body. Obsession in the first place. And as you build that life, something remarkable begins to happen. You start to notice that the apology you were so desperate for begins to lose its weight. Not because you stop caring about what happened to you, but because you are no longer standing still waiting for it. You are moving, you are growing, you are becoming more fully yourself with every single day. And a person in motion does not have the same desperate need for closure from someone who is never going to provide it honestly anyway. The life you are building becomes its own form of closure. The confidence you are developing becomes its own answer to every cruel thing they said about you. The joy you are cultivating becomes the most undeniable proof that they were wrong about you all along. This is the truth they cannot stand, not your anger, not your grief, not your need for their apology, but your genuine, invisible, and unstoppable thriving, because the narcissist built their sense of superiority on the assumption that without them you would fall apart, that you needed them to function, that their departure or their cruelty would leave you permanently diminished. And every day that you wake up and choose yourself, every day that you invest in your own growth and your own happiness and your own becoming, you are dismantling that assumption brick by brick, and there is nothing they can do about it and nothing they can say that will stop it. So stop waiting for the apology and start building the evidence that it was never necessary. Start building the life that makes their absence look like the greatest favor anyone has ever done for you. Because that is the real revenge, and it is the only one worth having, and it will outlast every moment of pain they ever caused you. There is a moment that comes in the life of every person who has survived a relationship with a narcissist, a moment that arrives quietly and without announcement, where you realize that the person who once had the power to unravel you with a single word or a single look or a single calculated silence no longer has that access to you. And this moment is not dramatic. It does not come with fireworks or a sudden rush of triumph. It comes in the most ordinary of circumstances. Perhaps you see their name on your phone and feel nothing. Perhaps you hear someone mention them and notice that your chest does not tighten the way it used to. Perhaps you catch yourself laughing genuinely at something completely unrelated to them and realize that an entire hour has passed without them crossing your mind. And in that quiet, ordinary moment, you understand something that no one could have explained to you while you were still in the middle of the storm. You understand that the most devastating thing you could ever do to someone who fed on your chaos is to become completely undisruptible. Because disruption was always their primary weapon, think carefully about this and you will see it clearly. Every tactic the narcissist used against you was ultimately a disruption tactic. The gaslighting disrupted your ability to trust your own perception. The silent treatment disrupted your sense of security and connection. The sudden rage disrupted your peace just when you thought things were finally stable. The intermittent affection disrupted your decision to leave by giving you just enough warmth to make you doubt your own suffering. The criticism disrupted your confidence. The isolation disrupted your support system. Every single move was designed to keep you in a constant state of internal turbulence, because a person who is internally turbulent is a person who cannot think clearly, cannot plan effectively, cannot trust themselves, cannot leave. And the narcissist understood this intuitively, even if they could never articulate it. See, consciously, your disruption was their control, and your peace was always their greatest enemy. So when we talk about building a life they can no longer disrupt, we are not talking about a surface-level lifestyle upgrade. We are not talking about posting carefully curated photographs that signal how well you are doing. We are not talking about performing wellness for an audience that includes them. We are talking about something far more fundamental and far more difficult. We are talking about the deep internal work of becoming a person whose center of gravity is located inside themselves rather than in the reactions and opinions of the people around them. Because the narcissist could only disrupt you because your sense of self was partially dependent on external validation. And this is not a character flaw. It is a human vulnerability that they specifically targeted and exploited. But the answer to that exploitation is to do the work of building an internal foundation so solid, so well examined, so deeply rooted in your actual values and your actual identity, that there is no longer a crack wide enough for their chaos to enter through. This work begins with radical honesty about who you are when no one is watching, when there is no one to perform for and no one to manage and no one whose mood you need to monitor and accommodate. Who are you in that silence? What do you actually value? What genuinely brings you a sense of meaning and purpose and satisfaction? Because one of the most insidious things narcissistic relationships do is they gradually replace your authentic preferences and values with a set of responses that are entirely organized around the narcissist's needs and moods. You stop knowing what you like because you spent so long focusing on what they liked. You stop knowing what you want because you spent so long trying to anticipate what they wanted, and reclaiming that self-knowledge is not a luxury. It is the foundation of everything else. It is the bedrock upon which an undisruptible life is built. Then you must do something that feels almost counterintuitive at first. You must become comfortable with stillness, because chaos has a gravitational pull when you have lived inside it long enough. The absence of drama can feel unsettling. The absence of conflict can feel suspicious. The presence of a calm and consistent day can feel somehow incomplete. And this is the narcissist's most lasting legacy. Not the specific things they did, but the way they rewired your nervous system to expect and even unconsciously seek disruption. So learning to tolerate and then genuinely appreciate peace is an active practice. It requires you to sit with the discomfort of calm until calm begins to feel like home rather than like the eerie quiet before another storm. And as you build this stillness, as you build this self-knowledge, you begin to make decisions from a completely different place. You stop making decisions based on fear of their reaction. You stop organizing your choices around what will provoke them or appease them or finally make them see you differently. You start making decisions based entirely on what aligns with your values and your vision for your own life. And this is where the revenge part becomes real. Not revenge in the petty sense, not revenge as a motivation, but revenge as an inevitable byproduct of your genuine flourishing. Because every decision you make from a place of authentic self-determination takes you further from the life they imagined for you and closer to the life that was always yours to live. The narcissist had a story about you. They needed that story to justify how they treated you. The story said you were too sensitive, too needy, too difficult, too much, not enough, lucky to have them, incapable of doing better. And every time you make a courageous choice, every time you honor your own needs, every time you succeed at something they told you that you could not do, you are rewriting that story in real time, and the new version has no role for them in it at all. Consider what it means to build financial independence when they told you that you were irresponsible with money. Consider what it means to cultivate deep and genuine friendships when they told you that no one else would put up with you. Consider what it means to pursue work that genuinely fulfills you when they told you that your ambitions were laughable. Every single one of these acts of self-construction is simultaneously an act of liberation and an act of refutation. You are not just building a life, you are dismantling the false narrative they built around you brick by brick with every good decision and every brave step forward. And eventually, if you do this work with enough consistency and enough commitment, you will arrive at the place that is the true destination of this entire journey. You will arrive at a place where they simply do not have the power to disrupt you anymore, not because you have hardened yourself against feeling, not because you have become cold or guarded or emotionally unavailable, but because you have become so genuinely rooted in yourself, so clear about your values, so surrounded by real connection and real purpose, that their chaos, it's nowhere to land, it reaches you and slides off because there is nothing inside you anymore that resonates with it. And that is the most complete and the most satisfying and the most lasting victory you could ever claim over someone who tried to make your life their instrument of control. There is a dynamic that operates beneath the surface of every narcissistic relationship that most people never fully understand until they are well out of it and looking back with the clarity that only distance and healing can provide. And that dynamic is this. The narcissist does not simply want to be superior to you, they need to be superior to you. And there is a profound and important difference between wanting something and needing it, because a want can be set aside, a want can be deferred. A want can exist without consuming everything around it, but a need of the kind the narcissist has, a need that is rooted not in confidence, but in a devastating internal emptiness that they can neither acknowledge nor escape. That kind of need is ravenous and relentless, and it will devour everything you offer it without ever being satisfied. And the moment you begin to truly grow, the moment you begin to expand beyond the carefully constructed boundaries they placed around your potential, that need is exposed in the most uncomfortable and undeniable way possible. You have to understand what the narcissist is actually made of beneath the performance, because there is always a performance. The confidence is a performance. The superiority is a performance. The charm is a performance. And like all performances, it requires an audience and it requires a stage, and you were the audience that validated the performance, and you were the stage upon which it was conducted. And the performance only works as long as the contrast holds, as long as you remain smaller than them, as long as your light stays dim enough that theirs appears bright by comparison. This is why your growth is not simply inconvenient to the narcissist. It is existentially threatening. Because when you begin to shine with your own genuine light, the performance is revealed for exactly what it is, a carefully maintained illusion built on top of a hollow center. Think about the specific ways this played out in your relationship. Think about what happened when you achieved something, when you received recognition, when you expressed a competence or a talent or a quality that drew positive attention from others. Did they celebrate you genuinely? Did they hold space for your success the way a secure person holds space for the success of someone they love? Or did something shift? Did the mood change? Did a subtle criticism emerge? Did they find a way to minimize what you accomplished, or redirect the attention back to themselves, or introduce a new conflict that effectively erased the positive moment entirely? If you recognize that pattern, then you understand intuitively what is now being stated explicitly. Your growth triggered their emptiness, and their emptiness responded the only way it knows how, with attempts to diminish and control and redirect. Because here is the central truth about narcissistic emptiness that everything else flows from. The narcissist did not choose to be empty in the way that a person chooses a coat or chooses a career. The emptiness is the result of a profound developmental wound. A wound that occurred so early and ran so deep that the narcissist built an entire personality structure around never having to feel it, and that personality structure, that elaborate architecture of superiority and entitlement and manipulation, it functions perfectly as long as the environment cooperates, as long as the people around them stay in their assigned roles, as long as no one grows too much or shines too brightly or asks too clearly for something the narcissist cannot provide. But when you break the cycle, when you refuse to stay in the role they assigned you, when you begin to grow in directions they did not sanction and did not control, the architecture begins to crack. Not because you attacked it, not because you confronted them or argued with them or tried to make them see themselves clearly, but simply because your growth creates a contrast they cannot manage. Your emotional health next to their emotional dysfunction becomes a mirror they cannot look away from and cannot bear to look at. Your expanding life next to their stagnant patterns of behavior becomes evidence that the story they told about you was never true, and the story they told about themselves was never true either. And this is where something genuinely remarkable happens in your own internal experience, because as you grow, as you do the work of healing and expanding and becoming more fully you, ourself, you begin to see the narcissist not primarily as a villain, though what they did was genuinely harmful and you are allowed to name it as such, but as a deeply limited person running an outdated and destructive program that they do not know how to exit. And this shift in perception is not about excusing them. It is not about minimizing your pain. It is about liberating yourself from the story in which they are the all-powerful destroyer and you are the helpless victim. Because that story keeps you small in a different way. It keeps your identity organized around their actions rather than your own choices, and you are so much more than a reaction to what they did to you. So break the cycle by growing in every direction available to you. Grow intellectually by feeding your mind with ideas and perspectives that expand your understanding of yourself and the world. Grow emotionally by developing the capacity to feel your feelings fully without being controlled by them. Grow spiritually in whatever way resonates with your deepest sense of meaning and purpose. Grow professionally by pursuing the work that aligns with your actual gifts rather than the diminished version of yourself the narcissist needed you to be. Grow socially by investing in relationships that are characterized by genuine reciprocity and mutual respect, rather than the one-sided dynamic you finally escaped. And as you grow, watch what happens to the narrative the narcissist constructed about you. Watch it become increasingly difficult to maintain. Watch the people who knew you inside that relationship begin to see the discrepancy between who you are becoming and who you were told you were. Watch the narcissist's attempts to continue the old story become more desperate and more transparent, as the evidence of your growth makes the story less and less believable. Because a narrative that requires the active suppression of someone else's potential in order to survive is a narrative that cannot withstand the simple and unstoppable fact of that person's genuine flourishing. Your growth is the most honest and the most powerful response you could ever give to every cruel and diminishing thing they said and did. It does not argue with them. It does not beg for their acknowledgement. It simply exists as undeniable and expanding proof that they were wrong about you from the very beginning. And that proof compounds with every day that you choose to invest in yourself rather than in the endless and exhausting project of managing their fragility. The cycle breaks not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet and consistent and courageous commitment to becoming the fullest possible version of yourself. And in doing so, you expose their emptiness not to punish them, but as an inevitable consequence of your own increasing fullness. And there is a profound justice in that. A justice that requires nothing from them and everything from you and delivers more than any apology ever could. There is something that the narcissist in your life understood about you, perhaps even before you understood it about yourself. And that something is the precise location and nature of your emotional triggers, because the narcissist is not randomly cruel. They are strategically cruel, and the strategy is built entirely on a map of your reactions that they spent months or years carefully drawing. They learned exactly which words would make you defensive, exactly which accusations would make you desperate to explain yourself, exactly which silences would make you anxious enough to capitulate, exactly which moments of warmth would make you forget every reason you had to protect yourself. And with that map in hand, they conducted a campaign against your peace so precise and so effective that you probably spent most of the relationship feeling like you were constantly losing an argument you never fully understood, constantly responding to provocations that seemed to multiply the moment you addressed one of them, constantly exhausted by the sheer volume of emotional labor required just to survive an ordinary day inside that dynamic. And here is the thing about that exhaustion that nobody talks about clearly enough. It was not accidental, it was the point. A person who is emotionally exhausted cannot think strategically, cannot maintain boundaries consistently, cannot access the clarity required to see the relationship for what it actually is. And the narcissist knew this either consciously or through the deeply ingrained instinct that develops in people who learn very early in life that emotional manipulation was the most reliable tool available to them. So they kept you reacting, they kept you responding. They kept you engaged in an endless cycle of provocation and defense that served one purpose, and one purpose only: to keep you so focused on the immediate emotional emergency that you never had the bandwidth to zoom out and see the larger pattern that was consuming your life. So when we talk about silence as a superpower, we are not talking about the cold and punishing silence that the narcissist used against you as a weapon, because that silence was not actually silence at all. It was loud with manipulation. It was a calculated withdrawal of connection designed to create anxiety and compliance. And you must understand the difference between that kind of silence and the silence that is about to become the most powerful tool in your own healing arsenal. The silence we are talking about is not punitive. It is not strategic in the manipulative sense. It is something far more profound and far more difficult to achieve. It is the silence of a person who has decided that their internal peace is worth more than winning any argument, worth more than being understood by someone who has no genuine interest in understanding them, worth more than the temporary relief of expressing outrage to someone who will simply use that outrage as ammunition. Because here is what actually happens in the nervous system of a narcissist when you stop reacting. And this is something you need to understand clearly because it will help you hold the silence even when every part of you wants to break it. The narcissist's sense of power over you is entirely dependent on your responsiveness. Every reaction you give them, whether it is anger or tears or desperate explanation or pleading or even just visible hurt, every single one of those reactions is fuel. It confirms that they matter to you. It confirms that they still have access to your emotional interior. It confirms that the map they drew of your triggers is still accurate and still useful. And when you remove that fuel, when you respond to provocation with genuine and grounded silence, something shifts in the dynamic that they are completely unprepared for because it has never happened before and they have no script for it. At first, they will escalate. This is almost universal, and you need to be ready for it because the initial response to your silence will be an intensification of the provocations. They will push harder and say more outrageous things and create more dramatic situations because they are trying to find the new threshold, the new trigger point that will get you responding again. And this escalation period is the most difficult part of the silence practice because it feels like evidence that the silence is making things worse, but it is not making things worse. It is making the dysfunction more visible. It is the narcissist system running out of control because the variable it depends on has been removed. And if you can hold your ground through this period, if you can maintain your silence and your composure while they escalate, you will arrive at something on the other side that will fundamentally change how you understand yourself and the relationship. What you will discover on the other side of that escalation is a version of yourself you may not have met before, a version that is calmer and more certain and more anchored than the person who spent years being pulled in every direction by someone else's emotional chaos. Because silence is not just the absence of reaction, it is the presence of something. It is the presence of self-possession. It is the presence of a person who has decided that they are the author of their own emotional state rather than the subject of someone else's emotional manipulation. And that self-possession accumulates with practice. It builds on itself. It becomes a new way of inhabiting your own life that extends far beyond your dealings with the narcissist and begins to transform every relationship and every situation you encounter. Consider what it means to walk into a room and know that no one in that room has the power to destabilize you without your permission. Consider what it means to receive criticism and be able to evaluate it calmly rather than either collapsing under it or exploding in defense of yourself. Consider what it means to sit with someone else's anger or disappointment and feel it land without feeling compelled to immediately fix it or fight it. This is what the practice of silence develops in you. Not coldness, not indifference, not the emotional unavailability that the narcissist modeled, but genuine equanimity, a settled and grounded relationship with your own emotional experience that allows you to choose your responses rather than being hijacked by your reactions. And the practical application of this is simpler than you might expect, though not easier. It begins with the pause, the deliberate and conscious pause between stimulus and response that creates the space in which your actual choice lives. When the narcissist says something designed to provoke you, before you respond, pause, breathe, feel the provocation land in your body and notice where it lands and what it feels like. And in that noticing, you create a separation between the trigger and the response that did not exist before. And in that separation, you find your power, not the power to win the argument, not the power to make them understand, but the power to decide whether this moment deserves your energy at all. Because most of what the narcissist throws at you does not deserve your energy. Most of it is noise designed to keep you distracted from the signal of your own life. And when you learn to recognize noise for what it is, when you develop the discipline to let it pass without grabbing onto it and wrestling with it and trying to make sense of it, you reclaim hours and days and eventually years of your life that would otherwise have been consumed by arguments that were never meant to be resolved, only to be perpetuated. Your silence is not weakness, it is not defeat, it is not an admission that they were right about anything. Your silence is the clearest possible statement that you have graduated from the school of their making and enrolled in something far more demanding and far more rewarding, the lifelong practice of governing yourself. And a person who governs themselves is a person no narcissist on earth has the tools to dismantle. There is a peculiar and profound alchemy that becomes available to human beings in the aftermath of their deepest suffering, an alchemy that cannot be accessed any other way, cannot be purchased or inherited or learned from a book in the abstract. It can only be discovered by a person who has gone all the way down into the darkness of a genuinely devastating experience and found something waiting for them there that they did not expect to find. So, anything that looks at first like nothing, like emptiness, like the complete absence of everything that previously gave their life structure and meaning, but which reveals itself over time and with courageous examination to be the raw material of an entirely new and far more authentic existence. And the person who has survived a narcissistic relationship and is sitting with the wreckage of what that relationship did to their sense of self and their sense of the world is standing at the exact entrance to this alchemy rite. Now, whether they know it or not, whether they feel it or not, whether they believe it is possible for them specifically or not, because the pain you are carrying is not only pain, though it is absolutely that, and you must not minimize it or rush past it or perform a recovery you have not yet actually made. The pain is real and it is legitimate and it deserves to be honored as such, but inside that pain, woven through it the way gold is woven through rock that looks from the outside like nothing valuable at all, there is information, there is clarity, there is a precision of self-knowledge that comfortable people who have never been truly broken open simply do not have access to. You know things now that you could not have known before. You know exactly how strong you are because you survived something that was genuinely designed to destroy you. You know exactly what you will never again accept in a relationship because you have lived the full consequences of accepting it. You know exactly what genuine love is not because you spent years inside its most sophisticated counterfeit. And all of that knowing, all of that hard-won and devastatingly expensive wisdom is the raw material of your purpose if you are willing to do the work of transformation. The first thing you must understand about transforming pain into purpose is that it is not a passive process. It does not happen to you the way healing from a physical wound happens largely on its own given time and basic care. It requires an active and deliberate engagement with your own experience. It requires you to turn toward the pain rather than away from it, to examine it with the kind of unflinching honesty that most people spend their entire lives avoiding, to ask not only what happened to you, but what it revealed about you. what it revealed about your patterns and your beliefs and your needs and your deepest values, because the narcissistic relationship did not create your vulnerabilities from nothing. It found vulnerabilities that already existed and exploited them with extraordinary precision. And understanding those vulnerabilities, not to blame yourself for having them, but to transform them into areas of genuine strength and self-knowledge, is one of the most important pieces of work you will ever do. Consider the specific ways the relationship broke you, and then consider what the breaking revealed. If they destroyed your confidence, consider what that tells you about how much of your confidence was built on external validation rather than internal knowing, and then begin the work of building confidence that has a foundation solid enough to survive the withdrawal of approval. If they isolated you from your relationships, consider what that tells you about the importance of genuine community in your life, and then begin the work of rebuilding those connections with a depth and intentionality that you perhaps did not bring to them before. If they convinced you that your ambitions were foolish or your gifts were insignificant, consider what the intensity of your grief about those ambitions tells you about how much they actually matter to you, and then begin pursuing them with the kind of fierce and unapologetic commitment that only a person who has experienced the cost of abandoning themselves truly understands. Because this is what purpose actually is at its most fundamental level. It is not a grand mission statement or a perfectly articulated vision of your ideal future. It is the answer to the question of what you will do with what happened to you. It is the decision to extract meaning from suffering rather than allowing suffering to be the final word about your life. And that decision, that one courageous and deliberate decision to refuse the role of permanent victim and claim instead the role of someone who turns their wounds into wisdom and their pain into contribution, that decision changes everything. Not immediately, not without difficulty, not in a straight line, but irrevocably and increasingly with every day that you commit to it. And then there is the matter of self-worth, because the narcissistic relationship did something very specific and very damaging to your self-worth. It did not simply lower it, it did something more insidious, and that it made your self-worth conditional. It taught you at a level deeper than conscious thought that your value as a person was something that had to be continuously earned and continuously proved and was always subject to sudden and arbitrary withdrawal. And this conditionality is the most lasting and the most damaging legacy of narcissistic abuse, because it follows you out of the relationship and into every subsequent situation, making you work too hard for approval in new relationships, making you shrink yourself to avoid conflict, making you tolerate treatment that your actual worth should never allow. So building unshakable self-worth is not about convincing yourself that you are perfect or that you have no areas requiring growth. Unshakable self-worth is the recognition that your value as a human being is not a variable, it is a constant. It does not increase when someone approves of you, and it does not decrease when someone treats you with cruelty or contempt. It exists independently of every opinion ever formed about you, including the opinions of the person who worked hardest to make you doubt it. And building this recognition requires you to repeatedly and consistently act in alignment with your own values, even when no one is watching, even when no one is applauding, even when the immediate reward is invisible. Because self-worth that is built on your own integrity and your own consistent self-honoring is the only kind that cannot be taken from you by anyone for any reason. Rise without them means exactly what it says. Not rise in spite of them, not rise to V something to them. Not rise while looking over your shoulder to see if they are watching, but rise without any reference to them at all. Rise because your life is yours, and it always was yours, even during the years they convinced you otherwise. Rise because the pain you survived contains within it the precise blueprint of the person you were always capable of becoming. Rise, because every single morning that you wake up and choose yourself over the narrative they built about you is a morning that compounds into a life so full and so genuine and so entirely your own that the very idea of needing their validation becomes not just unnecessary but genuinely incomprehensible. This is the transformation, not a return to who you were before they hurt you, because that person does not fully exist anymore, and honestly, that person was the one who was vulnerable to exactly the kind of relationship you just survived, but a becoming, a forward movement into a version of yourself that is wiser and stronger and more boundaried and more genuinely compassionate and more fiercely committed to their own integrity than any version of you that existed before the pain. And that version of you, that person who rose from exactly this kind of devastation with their humanity intact and their purpose clarified and their self-worth finally unconditional. That person is not just surviving, That person is the evidence that what was done to you did not win. That person is the living proof that the most powerful force available to a human being is not the cruelty of someone who tried to destroy them, but the indestructible capacity of the human spirit to transform even the worst of what it has endured into something worth living for. There is a day that comes for every person who has walked through the fire of a narcissistic relationship and emerged on the other side, still breathing, still intact, still fundamentally themselves, despite everything that was done to dismantle them. A day that does not announce itself with ceremony or clarity. A day that often arrives disguised as an ordinary Tuesday or an unremarkable Wednesday morning, when the coffee is still brewing and the light is coming through the window in that particular way. It does when the world is simply continuing to exist without consulting anyone's emotional schedule. And on that day, something happens that is so quiet and so complete that you almost miss it. You realize that you have not thought about whether they are sorry. You realize that the question of their remorse, which once occupied so much of your mental and emotional real estate that it was essentially a second full-time job, has simply ceased to generate the same desperate urgency it once did. And in that realization, in that quiet and almost accidental moment of noticing, you encounter the truest and most lasting victory available to a person who has survived what you have survived. But before we talk about that victory, we need to talk honestly about the waiting, because most people who have been through narcissistic abuse spend a significant portion of their recovery in a state of waiting that they may not even fully recognize as waiting. It does not always. Let's look like sitting by the phone or checking their social media or rehearsing the confrontation in the shower. Sometimes it looks like an inability to fully commit to new relationships because some part of you is still holding a place open for the resolution that never came. Sometimes it looks like a subtle and persistent anger that colors everything in your life because the injustice of what happened has never been acknowledged by the one person whose acknowledgement felt most necessary. Sometimes it looks like a recurring dream or a recurring thought pattern that keeps returning you to specific moments in the relationship, as though if you examine them enough times, you will finally extract from them the meaning that will allow you to close the chapter completely. And all of these things, all of these manifestations of the waiting, share a common root, which is the belief that you cannot be fully healed until they are fully sorry. And this belief, as understandable as it is, as deeply human as it is, as completely reasonable as it would be if you were dealing with a reasonable person, this belief is the single most effective way the narcissist continues to control your life long after you have physically left the relationship. Because as long as your healing is contingent on their behavior, you have handed the timeline of your own recovery to someone who has demonstrated repeatedly and conclusively that they cannot be trusted with anything that belongs to you. Least of all, something as precious and as fundamental as your peace, and you must sit with that for a moment and let it land in its full weight. You are waiting for permission to heal from the person who caused the wound. You are seeking the key to your own liberation from the person who built the prison, and they are never going to give it to you, not because the key does not exist, but because giving it to you would require them to acknowledge that they were the one who took it in the first place. So let us talk about what it actually means to stop needing their remorse, because it is widely misunderstood, and that misunderstanding keeps people stuck in a secondary trap that is almost as confining as the original relationship. Stopping needing their remorse does not mean deciding that what they did was acceptable. It was not acceptable, and you are allowed to know that with absolute clarity for the rest of your life if necessary. It does not mean forgiving them in the sense of excusing or minimizing or pretending the harm did not happen. It does not mean arriving at a place of warm feeling toward them or wishing them well in any active sense. It means something far more specific and far more personal than any of those things. It means completing the internal transaction yourself. It means giving yourself the validation that you were waiting for them to provide. It means becoming the witness to your own experience, who declares clearly and finally that what happened to you was wrong, that you did not deserve it, that you responded to an impossible situation with more grace and more love than it warranted, and that you are hereby released from the obligation to wait any longer for someone else to say so.